Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana announced that 308 billion rand will be allocated to state-owned entities during this financial year. He said some SOEs will be consolidated to ensure economic growth. Let's have a listen to the minister.
The future of state-owned companies is under consideration by the Presidential State-Owned Enterprise Council. Their future will be informed by the value they create and whether they can be run as sustainable entities without bailouts from the fiscus. Some state-owned companies will be retained while others will be rationalized or consolidated. To reduce this continued demands on South Africa's public resources, the National Treasury will outline the criteria for government funding of state-owned companies during the upcoming financial year.
All right, that's the background to this conversation now. Joining us to talk about the solutions around state-owned entities is former CEO of the Post Office, Mark Barnes, who speaks to us now. Mr. Barnes, thank you very much for your time. Can I start with something that probably is high on the minds of South Africans who want to know what the response has been to your proposal to try and buy up the South African Post Office? You said that you wanted 60% with, of course, a consortium that you would be doing this with. What has been the response?
Very good morning. The government hasn't paid me the courtesy of a formal response, despite the fact that that was tabled 5 months ago. It is their want, I've found, that when they're not sure of something, they don't say anything. But that aside, I think that in principle, just referring to the budget, we're spending almost all of our money on either rescue or past failure. Okay? Whereas the future of government's finances depends on their revenue. So we should be looking, in that case, to business as partners because they are the generators of tax which fund the government. And so we've got it 100% wrong by focusing our attention on failure and rescue rather than on changing the input costs and making it easier to do business and generating profit, where the state now gets 27% of everything we do. That is where we need to change our focus to get escape velocity out of this bog that we find ourselves in, which, despite the 182 billion sort of commodities rescue, has not in any way been cured at its root.
All right.
So I'm saying, sorry, please.
All right, let me jump in quickly. Let's use a living example, Mr. Barnes, and let me ask you, with the deal that is currently ongoing around SAA, we know that there's a strategic equity partner, and that has been ongoing, I can't tell you for how long now. But do you think when the finance minister says we are now going to dispense some tough love when it comes to these SOEs, is he putting his money where their mouth is in as far as making sure that this private equity partner that is supposed to be part of the SAA deal does go through?
Well, I guess they are crossing the line there. Everyone tries to avoid the big P word, privatization, and this to an extent is. I don't want to comment on the commercial case of SAA in its current form because I'm not convinced of it. Okay, what I am convinced of, more than convinced of, and prepared to risk capital on, is the future of a reimagined post office, which goes way beyond postal services, is attached to the national payment system, and sees every county in the post office as a channel between government and its people. So we should be getting vaccinated there, we should be getting our medicine there, we should be voting there, we should be transacting there, and which is why I require it to be attached to the national payment system. So we have to get business partners whose purpose is to make money and or lose money, not to stay in power. And there's fundamental different drivers. Now imagine the partnership that business and the state could come together in, because what we're doing at the moment is everything is a divide. Even the president's Soda speech, he talked about whose responsibility it might be to create jobs. It's all of our responsibility. We need to knit the power of the state and the legislature of the state and the policies of the state with the people whose remit it is to make money and pay tax. Everything that the business sector, whether it's in partnership with government or not, does successfully, the state gets the biggest piece. Yeah. And so can we not see the sense in a business intersection within state policy? Well, that would be my argument.
You've already mentioned that the ANC appears to be very strongly averse to what could be seen as privatization, particularly the left allies of the African National Congress. There are two key elements here, Mark Barnes, aren't they? And that is the commercial aspects or commercial interests and developmental interests. Which of these do you think the ANC is most worried about? I should think that as ordinary members of the public, we want for these SOEs to generate their own profits so that they don't rely on the public purse. But I suppose their argument is going to be developmentally, is that going to fall by the wayside?
No, it absolutely can't fall by the wayside. I mean, that's the very argument why you should have a successful post office. Because if the state doesn't succeed on its own, business will step in, as it has done in healthcare and security and education and all those other failures. Okay, and when that happens, they provide great services, but to like less than 5% of the population. No one's going to do the developmental mandate other than the state, and it's vital and necessary. The post office has a dual mandate, a developmental mandate. We have to provide addresses to anyone and everyone and so on. I could go, we haven't got time. But, you know, the new thinking around philanthropy, to take an example, is that philanthropy is a business. Developmental mandates are a business because absent a commercial driver and the multiple streams of revenue that are required to compensate for the losses that are necessarily incurred in delivering a developmental mandate, you need to have a sustainable economic model. Okay, so if you want to turn it into just a cost center, then go ahead. But let's not talk about bailouts. Let's just talk about the costs. I don't think it has to be, because it is a commercially irreplaceable footprint which has proved in dual mandates around the world. We're not the only country that's got a dual mandate. China's got a dual mandate. All the post office CEOs that I've met have got dual mandates. And they do so in a marriage between the private and public sector, and both succeed. That's the answer. The answer is not for us to sit on opposite sides of the table, both thinking we're right. We're both wrong until we get into the middle.
Let's talk about the one SOE, Mark, that simply cannot be allowed to fail, and that is Eskom. The decoupling of Eskom has already begun with the transition elements, or transmission element rather, having been processed in December, or having gone through in December. Do you think that things are possibly looking up? And in particular, I'd like to get your thoughts on the current leadership there as well.
Okay, I don't really understand the economic net worth of the splitting up of Eskom, but let me say this. Eskom obviously can't fail. Electricity is the artery of business and infrastructure and everything else. In fact, the unit cost of electricity is such a big piece of people's costs that we should seek to minimize it, so that instead of making money out of electricity, we make money out of the profit that input cost generates. Like petrol, for example. Keep the petrol price low, it'll lower the cost of transport, people will make more profits, we'll earn more tax. Okay, so Eskom is vital, too big to fail. Eskom is sadly invested in and still trying to fix outdated technology. There needs to be a giant leap away from coal-fired power stations, which are dysfunctional, towards the new forms of energy that are around the world. I think Mr. De Ruyter has got an almost impossible task. I've met him. I think he's a competent, concerned, and motivated individual. And, you know, I don't think anyone necessarily could do better there. But we need, as a country, to understand that we need to take some big leaps instead of little bit by little bit feeding past failures. That we have to move away. We have to cut our losses. We have to go forward in something which over time will be investing in revenue streams, not paying for the past. 330 billion rand of interest, 308 billion in state bailouts, a huge amount in state rescue, not social development, social rescue. Okay, and if we changed our mindset beyond the 4-year term that we need to stay in power and moved away from steady as she goes towards giant leaps, you know, IBM lost the war because they weren't prepared to take the leap that Apple was. Kodak lost the war because they weren't prepared to accept digitization. And I can give you lists and lists of failures of people who stuck to something that's no longer relevant.
All right, let's wrap it up then and talk about the one entity that you are interested in. Yes, you've said that it's been 5 months since you've expressed this interest in the post office. You've had no response from government. Is that where you're going to leave it?
At some point you leave it. The government is quite entitled not to deal with me in selling any of its assets, okay? But it's not, in my view, entitled to completely ignore these things, okay? That's just bad manners. So, I don't know. I know that the weight of funds is there, and I'm hoping that at some point we will look past our own agendas towards alternative commercial and alongside with developmental mandates. And so I'm hopeful that at some point someone will give me a call, even if it is to chat about, how I can contribute. My purpose here is to contribute, okay?
Yeah.
And so I think we'll get there. I actually think that we'll get there. I think that the SOE Council will at some point recognize that there isn't a better model for some, okay? Yeah. Eskom should be a utility. Water should be a utility. I don't believe that these are public-private partnerships. But where there is a commercial alternative, where the private sector can steal our lunch and where they can take money out of the fiscus, I think the government should partner with business and have a good go.
Mark, let me press you a little bit. I am letting you go.
Yeah.
Why haven't you picked up a phone and said, Minister Khumbudzo Ntshabeni, talk to me?
Well, she's got it in writing. And it's been acknowledged, receipt has been acknowledged, but no response has been forthcoming. And she's not the only minister or member of government that has seen this offer. In fact, now it's in the press, everyone's seen it. But it was tabled individually to 3 senior members of cabinet. They've received it. And then I think what happens is it goes into a political debate, and maybe they just don't want to deal with me. Fine. But I know what's going on in SAPA, and I would venture an opinion to say they'd welcome me back. The unions, the people, the system that we started building.
As CEO again, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'd require that.
And would you be up to the task?
Well, I don't know. I'd give it a damn good throw, and my history would suggest that I would.